Perfect. And Beth, you should be able to see the screen. Oh, you're just muted, Beth.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I see your presentation here.
Excellent. Evening, everybody. We'll give everybody another 30 seconds or so to dive on in. Quick audio test. Thanks for joining us this evening, this afternoon, and good night, as they say. You know what? That's great. We're seeing a lot of, just like Harold's, we're seeing a lot of the AI note takers joining in as well. That's
Yes,
great.
he's notorious for that.
That's right. And then it's the AI that's, typing in notes and questions. All right, welcome everybody. Let's jump in. First of all, in the chat, please let us know whereabouts you're coming from and how many clinics you're involved with. And in the chat's open. We've got Q&A open, and we've got a couple hundred registrants for tonight. So really looking forward to digging into it from both the emerging DSO, the soon-to-be emerging DSO, planning to be a DSO, and then obviously many of the multi-sites. So this is fantastic. This is something that I had been talking to the team at Apex for a little while because this is such a great theme. How to negotiate the non-negotiables, how to negotiate things differently versus the perception of, oh, it is what it is. So for those of you that haven't joined us for one of these webinars before, it is a fantastic overview welcome for these continuing education courses. Myself, I'm the owner and president of Cirrus Consulting Group. We are really the preeminent dental office lease negotiation firm for group dental clinics and individual clinics over the past 31 years. And I couldn't be more excited to have Bethany join us. Beth is the senior payer relationship specialist at Apex. This is a great piece because Beth looks after all the largest groups, 100 plus, in terms of dealing with all of the billing, the processes, production versus collections, etc., and trying to help to make sure that we are driving more revenue from insurance, and obviously Sears to helping to drive down your second biggest expense on overhead. Beth, 14 years in the business, so comes with a wealth of experience between clinical managing, regional managing, multi-sites, dealing with all contracts, negotiations, etc., and now 2 years on the Apex side, dealing with all the fee negotiations and really sharing the best practices of everything that she's learned thus far. So Beth, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm super excited.
Awesome. So yeah, let's jump into it, guys. I thought I'd start off with a little bit of a poll just to help customize some of the content for tonight. So what you'll see is how many locations is your practice group? And we know there's lots of those that might not have opened their first clinic yet. No problems. We'll cover some of those basics. And we know we have some that are in the 5, 10, 15, 30 plus range, as well as a couple in the 100 plus. So we've had the privilege of helping groups go from 8 to 46. We've worked with groups that have had over 300 locations, and it really does come down to how do we look at the business differently. And for those of you that are in the aspiring DSO space, we'll touch on a lot of the best practices that are just as applicable for the individual practitioner. So that's exactly the purpose of today. So if you can take a quick second, add some of those polls, and that'll help just to customize some of these components because boy, has it been tough, right? Beth, we were just talking about this, but doctors, if nobody's pat you on the back going through global pandemics, crazy inflation, tariffs, uncertainty, economics, recession, God, goodness knows, what an remarkable 5 years. So Truly, the fact that you've now jumped on to one of these continuing education courses, thinking differently about the business and thinking about how to drive more results and drive more profit is fantastic, right? It's exactly what we're here to do. So, really, the purpose of tonight is a fewfold. One is how do we really start understanding the trends? Rental rates, vacancies, comp reports, demographics, all these types of things are key and critical. Number two, how do we streamline the billing processes? Beth will touch on afterwards how to drive cash flow, how to drive some of that efficiency, and ultimately how to help to deal with these insurance companies. How do we help to properly negotiate? How do we deal with these non-negotiables? And when it says, "Oh, well, I didn't think I could," or it is what it is, it's so similar to the lease. The amount of times we hear a doctor that said, "Oh, well, I was told by my broker, lawyer, etc., that it's a standard form lease. It is what it is." Right? We're 31 years in the business and we've never seen two leases alike. So we'll talk about how to evaluate and negotiate those lease terms. So for the 56% that are in the 1 to 5 range, 2 to 5, 5 to 10, so a good mix of those that are in the sort of 1 to 20 range, which is perfect. And then we'll explore some of the best practices to drive that reimbursement management and streamline things across the board. For our PACE accreditation and conflict of interest disclaimer, I am the president of Cirrus Consulting Group, and CEs will be processed. Give us about 10 business days and we'll get those processed for those of you that collect them with the AGD. Perfect. So this is a great one to start with, is for those of you that have multi-sites or those of you that are one and growing, these are some of the key best practices to share. Number one is really now tracking, obviously, owned versus leasing. But then how are you managing that lease portfolio today? Or if it's a single or two or three locations, how are you managing that single location? How are you tracking some of the critical dates? Do you know offhand when your lease expires? Do you know when that option to renew deadline is, which is typically can be upwards of 6 to 9 to 12 months prior to that lease expiry? And for those of you that might forget or miss it, can become devastating because those remaining 2 5-year options can now become null and void. Tracking so that you're always aware of how many leases are coming up within the next 2 years. So for the 17% of you that are within the 5 to 10 rooftop range, this becomes critical because my God, on top of everything else you're doing, running the clinics, running your staff, right, dealing with all these rising expenses, vendors, renegotiations, etc. The lease, unfortunately, is one key element that frequently gets overlooked. And then, if you saw one of the articles that was posted in one of the national newspapers today, a lot of the private equity groups or a lot of the real estate income trusts, the REITs, are dramatically increasing rents to try to sort of squeeze the tenants and drive more bottom line. The strategy, and this is an interesting one. Now, how many leases are coming up in the next 2 years, and then what's your plan to renegotiate? As I've had the privilege of talking with hundreds of different multi-sites and emerging DSOs or DSO groups, part of the conversation now is, well, there really isn't a set strategy. Or, we start probably 3 or 4 months prior to renewal. We wait to find out what the landlord wants to charge us. And then we're paying 20 today. They want 25. Hey, if we get them down to 24 or 23, we've really won. Yet there's still another 86 and a half other pages of stuff in that lease that the landlord is adding in, which we should need to be aware of. And then the big one, especially of those of you that are starting to grow, as you're seeing from the many different dental supply companies, the more locations you have, the more leverage, right? And certainly the larger volume discounts. So my question to you is, are you getting the same leverage dealing with all your landlords as you are with all your different suppliers? And the answer we always get is no, right? Each landlord treats us like a mom and pop shop. I'm not getting any leverage, etc. So that's really where we fit in of having done over 13,000 of these office lease negotiations, principally all medical dental, gives us this great piece. Where do we fit in? Well, first of all, as it pertains to inventory, we're talking with doctors all the time that are buying, building, preparing for transition, etc. There's lots of factors that can affect, and I'll touch on five of them this evening, that can impact the value for the valuation, right? And also those of you thinking of expanding some of those key costs. The leverage, right? Leveraging your leverage. What's the data? How do we build on it? How do we help to protect that practice sale value and grow from there? Group buying power is another big one, right? Definitely as you're growing, your covenants increase and your amount of leverage increases with that as well. Heaven forbid, doctors, if you were to pass away, there was a devastating example of a doctor in his early 40s who passed away with a 10 operatory clinic and became just an emergency exit type of situation. And these are exactly the type of things that, heaven forbid, something were to happen, is your practice and or practices prepared for that quick emergency exit? We did a presentation recently with one of the national practice brokers, and they really talked about the emergency exit. And that was a big component because typically, if it doesn't sell in the first 90 days, it sells for a fraction. If not, it doesn't sell at all. So these are the type of things to consider. And lastly, for those of you that might lease some locations, own some locations, just as applicable, very important that there is a lease set up between the real estate corporation from the practice corp. As you may know, a lot of the larger fish in the sea don't want to own the real estate. It's the arbitrage game. They want to go from 5 locations to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 40, etc., and don't want to tie up any extra capital in the real estate if they don't have to. I'll point out that if there's any questions and whatnot, the Q&A is open as well as the chat. Feel free to post it in, and we'll cover some Q&A towards the end as well. Cirrus, where do we exist? It's a privilege. 31 years in the business, started in 1994. We really are the only healthcare specialized tenant advisory and lease negotiation firm of our size and scope in North America. We're always remunerated directly from the doctor. That's it. So we're never paid by the landlord. As we see, there's lots of great brokers out there, but obviously, the more the doctor pays, typically the more the broker is paid in commission. So there's always that direct conflict. And then, quite frankly, at that point, if you've already signed a binding letter of intent in the eyes of the landlord, it's pretty much done by the time it gets to the lawyers or otherwise. So, we've had the privilege of helping to make sure that, let it be all the business or financial components of the lease, very important that there's dental specific language and you're leveraging your leverage. How do we do it? In the essence of time, I won't go through a live demo, but there is over 95 billion square feet of licensed data, plus our own proprietary data of the 13,000 locations we've negotiated in Cirrus's history. That gives a huge amount of ability to make sure that, as you know, in all other aspects of your business, data drives better and more profitable decisions. So how do we deal with it? Well, if we dealt with your landlord 2 or 3 times, or if we have 2 or 3 existing locations with one of the larger national landlords or the mom and pop, that gives us a ton of ability to say, look, Josh at XYZ landlord, look, we just did this for your client in Omaha, and now look, we're doing it for another location here in Albuquerque, and here are some of the terms and similarities we want across the board. Data becomes key. So let it be from New York to Los Angeles to Toronto to Tampa, where we were last week. These are the type of pieces that we can pull an unprecedented level of detail for your particular building. Market rates, vacancies, full demographic reports, as well as key overviews of not only the general market, right, but also the sub-market, borough, right, to the county or sub-county, and then even to the property, or back to my old hometown in Marina Del Rey and Santa Monica out in LA. right? It is lots of shifts. And if there's one thing that's been pretty remarkable is the amount of changes that have gone on between rental rates, vacancies, and certainly the impacts to rents. So let's dig into the cost reduction. And we're going to keep things pretty tight for time. But bottom line, not only you as an individual, you are the best tenant on the planet. You've got the highest build out costs, you've got the lowest default rates, right? The build out costs these days easily between 250 to 450 per square foot. We had one in the Bay Area recently at 450 per square foot. You're in the same location for 26 and a half years. You're COVID proof. You can't work from home. The default rate of a dentist, let alone dental group, at the end of 10 years is less than 0.5%. A restaurant's well over 90. So why? Why then are 54% of dentists overpaying in rent today? Part of it is, right, a lack of time, lack of data, lack of experience, and not, doing that carefully choreographed game of chess. So let's talk savings here and EBITDA. Right? What is EBITDA? For those of you not yet in the multi-site or not yet going through evaluation, it really boils down to earnings and or normalized earnings. What would the earnings be if you weren't there, right? What's that profitability, if you will? So from that perspective, every dollar that you can save adds incremental value and a multiple of that dollar amount, that EBITDA, is one that can create exponential value. So let's talk about your second biggest expense, and that by and large is your, beyond your staff, is typically the lease. So from a base rent perspective, one of the easiest and the first ones to think about. But there's another six major financial variables that we do each and every time. Annual increases, common area maintenance, fixturing, right, is a period that anytime you're doing renovations, expansions, you name it, or a build out, you don't want to have to burn cash. So let it be base rent and or triple nets. You want to get as long of a period as you can without having the meter running. And then especially in exchange of a 10-year term, recently we just did one with a national landlord. We got 10 months worth of free rent every January of each year, came in at $0. Right? One of the most expensive months in a dental clinic. What a great time to be able to have it as rent free for the next 10 years. And then the other pieces. No group loves to pay for an HVAC system. It's the landlord's asset, but you have to buy a new one. Well, how fair is that? So tenant improvement allowance is something that can be negotiated as additional dollars to help go towards your practice, let it be paint, flooring, HVAC, or beyond. And then don't unanticipate or underanticipate the importance of things like landlord work that the landlord's contractors might be able to do for a whole lot less. What should it do for you? So, for any individual site, it should provide fair and affordable terms. Everything I mentioned before should be making sure we're not overpaying in rent, that it's not a zero sum game, but it's something that can help to ensure that it's aligned with market and you're not on that world's most boring roller coaster that just keeps going up and up and up, and every 5 years it keeps going up and up and up and beyond. It should provide some key long-term stability and security. Typically advise for most clients, if they're here and they're $1 million plus producing clinic, a long-term lease is now aligned with what the banks are looking for. Typically, if you've got 2 or 3 years left on the lease, Bank of America or otherwise will not issue a long-term loan if there's insufficient term on the lease. Now, there's some ways around it, but ultimately they want to make sure that if they're going to give you $1.5 million to buy your next clinic, right, that there is not a risk that in 2 or 3 years, whoops, Beth, I got to go pick up and I need another 300 grand to move across the street. One of the key things that I would want anyone to add to their lease portfolio and leases, especially for the roughly 42% that are one location and growing, is something called a dental specific death and disability clause. So, for those of you taking notes or following along, it's just one of the dozens of different pieces of dental specific language that becomes important that heaven forbid if you were as the sole breadwinner or now, main breadwinner for the practice, asking yourself if something were to happen to you on the drive home, right? What now occurs? So, in most cases, most doctors don't realize that they are personally guaranteed, and as they've added a second or third location, they will remain as personally and continually liable even after they pass, which is remarkable. So, the more things we can do in advance today to help prepare yourself for the unspeakable, the better. And these are the type of things. There was a devastating example of a doctor north of our office, 43 years of age, built out a beautiful six operatory clinic, and 3 weeks prior to the grand opening, died of a massive heart attack. Fully built out clinic, no doctor, no patients. We don't all have to be practice evaluators to realize that that clinic was worth zero, technically less than zero. The bank got the pound of flesh from the life insurance policy, and the spouse, unfortunately, then got the phone call from the landlord that said, unfortunately, Mrs. Smith, you're now responsible for the roughly 9,000 a month, increasing at 4% per year for the remaining 9.5 years on the lease. So, the fact that you're here joining an event such as this to prepare for the unknown, these are the type of things that, with all the hard work, all the blood, sweat, and tears, all the due diligence, all the planning, etc., right? It doesn't take much to throw things into a tailspin. The more things we can do today to put a protective force field around those eventual practice sale proceeds remains key. When looking at that and protecting ourselves and driving the financial impact, this is always a great example. And we run the pro formas for a lot of clients. One of the big ones are when looking at cash flow is when we see a total monthly rent of $5,000 per month with a roughly 3% annual increase. Rough math, back of the napkin, almost $3 million of cost and tenancy expense over the life of the lease. So, in your next renewal, look at that as if you are signing a $1 million check to the landlord. The lease represents the biggest check that you will sign to any personal or professional entity in your entire life. Therefore, the more things we can do in advance to protect yourself, right, and plan for the future and negotiate for it, right? Do not fall into the trap where you're so busy, right, being chairside, you come out of the operatory, right? The office manager comes up and says, "Oh my gosh, the landlord said we forgot to renew our lease. We've got to sign ASAP, and there's a 35% rent increase, and the lease is up in 1 month." What are you going to do? The landlord now has us over a barrel. The more things we can do in advance to prepare ourselves for it and starting the lease process 2 years prior are key. Now it's looking at how do we protect some of ourselves. So, just a couple of best practices in the essence of time. Be careful. Many of you have hired some of your staff, let it be in Canada as a T4 or T4A independent contractor. For those of you in the States, W2 versus 1099. You may have language in your lease that prevents you from bringing in an independent contractor as they are an outside business, now on a rev share or otherwise. And that, by definition, right, is now technically could be deemed as a subtenant or a subleasee, where we've seen landlords either A, try to push the doctor into default, or more likely use it as an opportunity to increase rent. For those of you that own your real estate or some components of your real estate, the lease still remains just as important. So again, for the 40 odd percent that are growing and looking to add a new location in the near future, fantastic. You have the good question to say, should I buy or should I lease? So the vast majority of you on here tonight are dentists and some non-dentist practice owners. As you're doing that, it's important that you've got all the data, right? What does that look like to buy? What are those build out costs? And Am I really ready to take the double decker hit, or is there extra financial advantage with my account, etc., to right lease and have that flexibility, or to start with a 2,000 square foot and then have the ability or right of first refusal to expand, or a right to purchase, or a right to offer, or a right of first refusal to buy the building. There's a number of different strategies depending on your situation, depending on your growth is key. 83% of you have leases in place. So this is just as relevant for those of you that are, some have both, and another 8% own. For those of you with the leases, or those of you that need to create a lease between your real estate corp and your practice corp, these are just some of the dozens and dozens of clauses to be aware of and to be renegotiating. So, for those of you that want to take a little screenshot, this is a critical one because for a group or a growing group, assignment becomes critical. And in most leases, there's a change of control provision that even if you bring on a minority shareholder or you bring on one of the associates in one of your locations and you give them 25% because you want them to have some, sweat equity to it and or buy in, that becomes important. And if it's not, the landlord will typically require an assignment or an approval that if you do bring in someone and there is even a minority shareholder change, that can trigger a default or otherwise. Demolitions, relocations. We're seeing a lot more of these now across the continent where landlords are giving themselves the right to, for just thinking about demolishing the building, can kick you out with as little as 6 or 12 months worth of notice. Relocations. Many landlords now want the flexibility to pick you up and move you somewhere else up to a maximum of 2 months worth of rent. We saw recently in a Los Angeles client. Imagine getting that brown envelope on the door that says that as of 30 days from today or 6 months from today, you need to be out. And doesn't mean that you're up and running. It just means you need to be out within that time frame. Surrender. What happens if you're consolidating some of your locations? Do you have to return it to pre-dental condition? Most doctors don't realize the landlord can have their cake and eat it too, meaning that they can either keep anything that is affixed to your premises, which can include some highly expensive type of equipment, non-trade fixtures, depending on how you've negotiated it. But they could also require you to return it to whatever it looked like when you moved in. Personal guarantees. So for those of the dentists on, as you're growing, you were probably the one that had to sign things personally or give that personal guarantee. That can easily be negotiated and or limited upon certain steps of your career. Things like exclusivity. How do we help to make sure that we can't have a big national DSO move in next door with a big marketing budget? These are just some of the key components that can be negotiated and can definitely be well structured in alignment with your group. Let me look at two examples before passing it to the Apex team. So these are just some of the main clauses. This was one we pulled from one of our clients' leases recently, and this is in 75%. So take a quick second and try to identify some of the main red flags that would impact both the individual practitioner as well as the multi-site. And at this point, when I was in Vegas 2 weeks doing a CE, I then said, "Who enjoys reading leases, Beth?" All right, what do we see for the first one? In short, you cannot sell without the landlord's written consent. And for those of you in the 5 to 10 range, the last thing you'd want when you want to retire and bundle them all together is get stuck with one or two because of a couple of sentences within your lease. In addition to that, this is now much more common, but if you ask to sell, the landlord can say yes, can say no, or can even terminate the lease just for asking to sell the clinic, which of course can be devastating. In addition to that, the landlord has this neat little clause that can increase rent dramatically versus what it is today. So if you've been getting a sweetheart deal and the landlord has the right that when you transfer the lease, they can basically reset it or bump it to fair market rent or 15% more than what it is today. And then the dreaded consideration clause. For those of you following along or looking through some of your leases, just search for the word consideration. If the landlord has the right to collect consideration from any sale of the tenant's business, right? Meaning money, let it be for if you're selling goodwill, charts, inventory, dental equipment, trade fixtures, etc. That is not included, but anything that is for example, leasehold improvements, walls, flooring, etc. If that's $150,000, the landlord then says, that's mine, right? And then when you say, no way, or am I paying you 100 grand when I'm selling my clinic? The landlord then says, great, what's your clinic worth without my keys? So from that perspective, becomes very important to make sure that you know exactly what you can bring with you if you're ever to relocate, right? And also what the landlord may be or try to be entitled to when you eventually go to sell. This can be devastating after a long, hard worked career. And then also for those of you that are, dentists and have personal guarantees, you might be shocked to know that even after you've sold and retired and enjoying retired life down in Florida, etc., that you will still remain as personally and corporately liable as you are today, as that lease continues to renew indefinitely. In summary, one little clause, hundreds of thousands of dollars of risk. Lastly, the option to renew. This is in 90% of leases. This as well can be devastating. If the renewals are important, provided that Dr. Joe Black shall remain as the tenant, right, and has paid its rent on time, etc., then you are able to renew the lease, right? If you are not Dr. Joe Black, then technically that buyer is going to have an issue because those two 5-year options are not transferable to your future buyer, right? And of course, in almost every lease, it states that in no event shall it be less than the rent paid at the last year of the original term. So how do we deal with these? Well, we take them out, rewrite them, reinsert them, and help to make sure that they are dramatically improved with some of that dental specific language. This was unfortunately a letter one of our doctors flipped to us and said, hey, I thought my landlord was my friend. Unfortunately, they sent me this. As you know, your lease expires on X. Pursuant to 2.4 of your lease, you had an option to renew, but you're required to give me written notice no later than 6 months prior to the expiration of the lease. And this was like 2 days later, which you did not do. Please be advised that my broker will be putting a for lease sign in a conspicuous but non-intrusive place on the premises, and he'll only show it during business hours. Oh, and by the way, if you want to stay, have your people call my people, right? And the landlord wanted a big 30% bump in rent. So be so careful for some of those individual times. How do we solve all of this? So again, managing your portfolio from one location to 10 locations to 100 locations, start early. Track your critical dates. Start 24 months in advance or leverage a company to do the analysis for you because time is leverage. And if you fall into the trap where the landlord's stalling, delaying, etc., dramatically can work against you. 31 years in the business, here's what we find. Number one, get all the signed documentation, full stop. Do not, if it's not countersigned by the landlord, if you don't have a fully executed version all the way back to the original doctor you acquired it from, that is the governing document where you'll find these things, not the renewals or anything else along the line. Then figure out the goals. What's your exit plan look like? Oh, Eric, I'm only, early 40s. I don't have a plan yet. Well, any good entrepreneur, don't go in without a clear exit. In addition to that, review the office lease for risks. Figure out what the good, the bad, the ugly is, right? And understand where some of these clauses would be a significant issue. It's a lot easier to do it now when your buyers than when your buyer or there is doing due diligence on your 5 or 10 locations and comes back with a fraction of the multiple or value, all because of some things hidden within the lease. Get the market rents. Understand if you're overpaying or underpaying in rent. And long before you do sell and exit, renegotiate those leases. Squeeze as much as you can to drive your profit up as much as possible. Negotiate, come up with a great outcome and strategy. And what have we not done yet? We have not picked up the phone and called the landlord. So please don't do that first thing tomorrow morning. But get all the due diligence, then negotiate the financial, then negotiate the business clauses, and do not stop until there's a final form lease that you're satisfied with. Lastly, right, in appreciation for everyone's time, we waive our regular fees and we'll do a complimentary lease review, rental rate analysis, demographic report. So what becomes important is we'll run one of these, calls where we'll go through all the financial analysis, we'll look through the multi-sites, and start to look at exactly how much the financial exposure and where those massages and improvements can come. Then it's all the demographics. Is now the right time to grow? What about this location, Eric? And is this something we want to expand? I'm contemplating, doing some pediatric works over here, some orthodontic work here, right? Even traffic patterns, being able to see how many vehicles are passing through at the individual times, and then all the way down in Connecticut or otherwise to get a good sense of, what's something that is at least within 5 miles of my current location or 10 miles, etc., right? And how and what are some other availabilities to open that second or third location. Then to look at some comp reports. What are the other clinics and other tenants with similar spaces for lease today paying? And how much more or less than market price am I paying across the board? And where should I be squeezing and focusing my negotiation efforts? And then the individual reports. These are great to really find out exactly what other tenants are paying in the building or otherwise. For the over 83% leases, this is the type of data that is invaluable because it helps to reinforce what we have. In addition to that, we do a full analysis of the lease to help ensure that we have a full plan and executed strategy across the board. So, on that note, we will be covering some Q&A. If there's anything quick, throw that into the chat. If not, I will be passing it over to Beth. And as we get to Beth, there's a quick button, as many of you requested, to get some demographics, that rental rate report, and/or to schedule a quick call with myself and the team to be able to go through some of that lease portfolio for you, help to get a much better sense of critical dates. And for those of you with the 5 to 10 to 20 locations, we will also, at no charge, do an analysis of your leases, highlight some of those key red flags, and come up with a negotiation treatment plan. In addition to that, there's a couple of great questions for Bethany. So, as we'll touch on today, and I'll pass it to her here, and Beth, you should be able to share your screen,
Thank you.
is some good questions about your UCR, right? Similar to your lease. When was the last time you analyzed your UCR rates? And have you negotiated or how frequently have your fees have been reviewed type thing. So, Bethany, looking forward to it. It is, I'll stop sharing on my side and perfect. I can see your screen. Beth, now
Awesome.
how do we negotiate and deal with our crazy insurance companies?
Yes, yeah. So we're gonna go through all of that. And something actually, Eric, that stuck out to me from your presentation was about preparing, a provider preparing themselves for selling. And I think that a lot of the times it's overlooked, when these providers are getting ready to sell and someone's asking, like, let me see your insurance rates. What do those look like? And they're like, my insurance rates, why do you want to see those? So I think that that's a great topic, and something that's overlooked, very frequent, but something that's very important. So we're going to go through all the fun stuff, but who is Apex Reimbursements? I've again been with Apex for going on 2 years. Our headquarters is in Baltimore. We recently opened a second location, which is where I am at, here in Cleveland, Ohio. And Apex was established originally in 2012. We opened up a full RCM department in 2023. It's full service there, and they are awesome. And we've serviced about over 4,500 practices, and I think at this point we have been in all states. And we're about 60% DSO, 40% solo, single practice providers or smaller practices. So a little bit about us. And then, as Eric mentioned, I do have some questions that I would love to kind of go through and just to kind of think about while we're going through this. I know everybody loves insurance companies and dealing with insurance companies, right? We do it every single day, unless, maybe you're a fee-for-service provider. But so a couple questions I just kind of want to go through is, as Eric mentioned, I believe also, how do your rates stand up to other providers in the area, and have you analyzed those rates? So have you talked to your colleagues? What are they charging? Maybe down the street, Dr. Smith, what is he charging? And when's the last time you increased your UCR rates? So that's another big one, is we have providers that come to us and maybe they haven't increased their UCR rates in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years pre-COVID. They haven't negotiated their rates, and everything else is increasing 10, 15, 20%, and your UCR rates are what they were maybe back in 2010. So that's a big thing as well.
And in the polls, they're still coming through, Beth, but
Yeah.
almost all were a no to having analyzed your UCR rates, and was a no to having you negotiated how frequently your fees can be reviewed as well.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Both of which we will touch on throughout this. So that's very good to know. If you can keep letting me know, Eric, how that's coming in.
Will do.
Um, Another big thing is knowing what insurance companies you're in network currently with, how you're accessing those insurance rates. There's tons and tons of third-party insurance companies out there nowadays, and you have affiliations that you never knew were there. And how do you handle those? Are you a direct contract third party? That's another big question. When's the last time you negotiated your rates? A lot of doctors, again, they don't know that they can negotiate their insurance rates. So lots of things that we're going to touch on throughout this. And if you want to take a screenshot of this, that way you can ask yourself that later or throughout this process. That's awesome as well.
And all too often, and just as a good reminder, the chat's open, Q&A as well. Yes, it is being recorded to the one question that came through, but this is perfect timing to be rethinking. If you feel like you've been working just as hard and taking home the same amount or less, right, these are some great strategies.
Yes, definitely. And so we just wanted to list a couple of topics that we are going to touch on. Where are some additional areas in your practice that you can generate increased revenue with? So, UCR rates is huge. A lot of providers do not realize how much that really, truly, truly impacts your insurance rates and your reimbursements and what you're getting from those insurances. Next is going to be dental network credentialing and optimization. So, how are you credentialed? Um, Optimizing how you are credentialed. Of course, negotiating your PPO rates, insurance verification, and revenue cycle management. So, first, we're going to dig further into those UCR rates as we have been discussing, right? So, benchmark your UCR rates by comparing with your colleagues. I have seen, and I love to see it, so many platforms nowadays, whether it's on Facebook or LinkedIn, lots of different AI or bots that you can use to really see where your UCR rates stand with, the rest of your providers in the area or the zip code. So that's number one, right? You want to make sure that you're in line with what everyone else is charging. You don't want to be too high. You also don't want to be drastically low. You want to be in that competitive range. So next is going to be increasing your UCR rates, can actually be utilized as leverage when you're negotiating. So a lot of the times providers that come to us, they say, well, we don't want to hurt our cash patients by increasing our UCR rates drastically, right? So what we tell these providers is, when we are negotiating on behalf of our providers, or even when you may be negotiating yourself, increasing your UCR rates is only going to leverage what you have, what you're getting reimbursed with. By doing so, if you go to your insurance company and your UCR rate for maybe a Crown, 2740 is maybe it's $800. Okay. Insurance rates, we typically see write-offs around 40%. And if the insurance is writing off 40% of that, and that's what they're going to pay you off of, you're probably only going to have about a $40 or $400 Crown payment, which is significantly low, right? That's almost like that's a 50% write off. So by increasing your UCR rate and maybe your Crown's more so along the lines of a $1,200 Crown, maybe then you're going to get more of a $700 or $800 payment. So increasing your UCR rates definitely help with the leveraging of negotiating. And then, of course, how often are you increasing your UCRs? We always recommend our providers should be increasing your UCR rates at least every 12 months, at maximum 24 months. But typically, we like to see that 12-month range. Next, I have here is a sample actually of what we do here within Apex for our clients. In this very first column, you're going to see top codes. You're going to see how often they're being utilized, what the current UCR rate is for the provider, and then different percentiles. So these are percentages of providers in the area or the region. We typically do it by zip code and what they are charging. We typically suggest that the sweet spot is around that 80 percentile. Keeps you competitive on the higher range, but you're not so competitive where patients are like, holy crap, that's really high, right? So we suggest that 80th percentile. This is actually pulled from a sample client of ours. And as you can see in the very last column, we rank them so they know where they stand. So looks like for an abutment, this client was actually below the 40th percentile. So they're charging $589 for an abutment, whereas, Dr. John down the street is charging probably $864 or $955, almost 50% more for the same exact treatment. So don't sell yourself short when it comes to your UCR rates. Really make sure you're analyzing those. A question that we had on here that we wanted to check, and I'm not sure if we're getting any answers in the chat here. I think I see a couple maybe. How much does your patient or practice collect from self-pay or fee-for-service patients? So how much cash are you bringing in? So I'll give you guys maybe 30 seconds to, maybe some people can answer that in the chat box.
There's also another question we just got in via email that I posted that everyone can see in the chat.
All right, let's see. How does the average dental practice convince the insurance companies to follow the law and do direct deposit as opposed to virtual credit card payments? So that's a great question. It's not really anything about convincing. It's actually opting out of it. So a lot of the times these insurance companies, they don't want you to know that you have that option to opt out, right? Kind of, Eric, like what you were saying, like no one really knows that you have that option. So definitely opting out would be number one. So you're going to want to contact that insurance company, let them know that you do not want the virtual credit cards. You are opting out of that, whether that might be an alternative of receiving, a hard check or the direct deposit, which we always suggest. The EFTs are much, much quicker. So electronic funds transfers, you're going to see payments probably within 2 weeks of sending a claim versus mailing it or not having EFTs. You're going to wait 30, 60 days, whatever that may be, and that's with it being a clean claim, right? How many of those do we send out? Clean claims, hopefully lots. All righty, moving on. So UCRs, again, a big part of it that a lot of people look over. Number one thing I will say before I move on, within Apex, that's something that we do first and foremost, before doing anything, is looking at those UCR rates and analyzing them, making sure you're where you need to be, right? You want to do that before you're reaching out to these insurance companies, because at some point they're probably going to ask you, hey, send us your UCR rates. Let's see what you're charging, as a cash patient. And if they see that you're charging less, that's another thing. If you're charging less than what they're willing to pay you or what they're going to pay you, they're not going to pay you, right? So definitely a very, very important piece. All right, keys to optimizing your insurance contracts. So negotiate. This whole thing that we're doing right now and that we're talking about discussing, negotiating, right? So negotiate your reimbursements. You can negotiate your review frequency. So that's another thing. A ton of providers that come to us, they have absolutely no idea that they can actually negotiate how frequently they can have their fees reviewed or their reimbursements reviewed. I know we have had a ton of providers coming in with a specific insurance company. I won't say who, but their contracts that they've been signing, it's like 5 years before they can review their fees again. And I mean, so much can happen in, like, again, look at COVID. So much can happen in 5 years, and it's like you're signing yourself up for these fees for 5 years. Even if you are, increasing your UCR rate, you're kind of stuck at those rates, and not much you can do once you sign that contract and agree to it. So negotiating your frequency, as I mentioned, and then negotiating specific codes and coverages. So maybe you don't have to send out a prior authorization for a specific code, or switching your network status. Maybe you want to go with, United Concordia instead of being a PARNet. Maybe you want to move to National Fee for Service, and negotiating those different level changes within networks. Next is going to be know how you are credentialed. So again, a big thing here within Apex, and I always recommend it even before Apex, when I worked in office, and that's something that I think really helps me throughout all of my working experience and career, is we always track, how you're credentialed, how is your provider in network with these different insurances. Is it a direct contract? Is it through a third party? What different affiliations are there? So honestly, you can just use an Excel spreadsheet and track it that way. What's your effective dates with these different insurances? And then check for different ways to be credentialed with those insurances. So a ton of insurances are nowadays on these different third-party insurance company lists and payer lists. And a lot of the times we are seeing a reimbursement difference of at minimum 10%. I mean, we're seeing upwards of 20, 30, sometimes even 40%, which I do have a couple of examples that I will show you guys throughout this presentation as well. Know your top billed procedures and negotiate those further. So a lot of the times, a little bit of key points here is to negotiate your top procedures, but first negotiate the entire fee schedule. So don't sell yourself short by only negotiating maybe 5 codes, right? Go into this and try to negotiate your entire fee schedule. Maybe you're going to get a 5% on your full fee schedule. And then you want to go back to that insurance representative and say, you know what, let's hone in on these top 10 billed codes or top 15 billed codes. Probably what you're billing 80, 90% of the time anyway, and get another 5% on those codes. So you're actually getting that 10% increase on what you're billing, again, 80, 90% of the time. And then lastly, compare your insurance rates to each other. So what is Aetna paying you versus what Cigna's paying you? What's Guardian paying versus Humana? So, and that's something that we like to look at too, because then we can take it to that insurance company and we can say, hey, we don't want to tell them how much those fees are exactly, but we can let them know, like, hey, Humana's paying, maybe 5% more or 10% more. You're the lowest fee schedule that we have. So these different points and keys to utilize as leverage when you're negotiating. And then on top of that, something that I really like to do is to let these insurances know who you are and what you offer. I worked with a pediatric provider, and she had service dogs for her patients. And I thought that that was so awesome, and it set her aside from, the average maybe pediatric provider. And I think that it's really important for these insurances to know what sets our doctors aside. I think me being able to work in office has really been able to help me throughout this process, because it gives me a different view or a different look, and it helps me want to let these insurances know who these doctors are, how much work they're putting into it, and what sets them aside differently. I wanted to include a sample. So again, something that we like to do, and you guys can do this, and providers can do this, pretty easily, is to see what types of these increases are. So when you get to the point of where they are finally going to give you an increased amount, see how much of that difference is, and then that way you can go back to them and say, hey, you're not going to pull one over on me. I know that this is a 1% increase, even though you guys might think that's great. And go back to them and ask for more. So for this patient, or this client for specifically, in the column here, you're going to see their codes, their current rates, or their original fee schedule, their increased rates, how much a difference that is, and what the increase is. So that way, again, you guys can go back to the insurance companies and say, okay, this looks great, we want to go ahead and accept it and move forward. Or you can go back to them and say, this isn't so hot. With this specific provider, they ended up profiting an additional, I believe, $25,000 a year just from one insurance company that increased their rates. So, alrighty, a big one. I know, Eric, you were talking about contracts and looking all that fun stuff. Majority of the time, I know a lot of our doctors that come to us, the likelihood of them reading a contract is slim to none. But it's super important, because that's where they put all the juicy info, right, Eric? So read your current contracts first and foremost. We got to do our homework, right? So what does your current contract say? So let's say, for example, this specific one, the provider was in network with Guardian. They were able to negotiate their contract every 24 months. So majority of the time, 99%, probably 100% of the time, you're going to see in your contracts how frequently you are able to negotiate. So before you start the process, along with doing your UCR review, you're going to want to check to see when you became effective with these insurance companies, and are you eligible for negotiating. If you never have negotiated and you've been open for 3-4 years, I can tell you probably are. And these terms can be negotiated as well. So again, we have a ton of providers that come to us and they think that, they signed a 5-year contract. In reality, we could have probably negotiated that, or they could have probably negotiated that down to a 12 or 24-month contract, to where they're eligible to negotiate again at that point. Alrighty, I know I'm wondering if we might get a lot of chats on this, hopefully, but third-party insurance companies. So you love them or you hate them, is what I have learned over my many years of doing this. It's something that can be very, very, very beneficial. And I did want to take some time just to kind of talk about this and touch on it. So moving a direct contract, right? So a lot of the times there's a lot of confusion on how the providers are contracted. That's why I mentioned it's super important to know how you are in network, who you are in network with, and how you're accessing them. So a lot of providers come to us and they maybe have a direct contract with the insurance company, meaning there's no middleman. Say I'm Dr. Beth and I have a direct contract with Aetna Dental. There's no middleman. We have that signed contract. Well, there's, again, a lot of third-party insurance companies. You might have heard of Connection, Carrington, Zealous, and they have what's called payer lists. And on those payer lists, they have a ton of different basically leasing agreements with these different insurance companies that you can access their patients through. So we have had a ton of providers coming to us and are changing from being directly credentialed with these PPO insurance companies to accessing them through a third party. We have on here, how does this work, right? So in order to be able to do this, you would have to term or break that contract, not break, that's probably not the best word, Eric, right? So term that contract with the direct insurance company and start attempting to access them through the third party insurance company instead. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're in network with that third party first. So if I want to try to utilize Connection maybe for my third party, I want to make sure that I'm in network with Connection Dental or GEHA first before I term my direct contract. And there's the pros and cons of this, right? So you want to weigh out that risk reward. So an example that I have here, in the very first column, you're going to see the codes. Second column, you're going to see what the PPO direct fee schedule is. So if we want to look at a comprehensive exam, 0150. Currently, maybe with this, let's say maybe it's Guardian. Guardian is paying $37. And again, this is just for example reasons. Guardian is paying $37 for a comprehensive exam. By trying to change the way that I'm accessing Guardian and switching to accessing through a third party, maybe like Connection or Zealous, that then went up to $61. I don't know about you guys, but 37 to 61 that's a 64, almost 65% increase, right? So overall, this example ended up averaging out to be a 57% difference. So the I guess risk on this is third parties can be a little bit tricky. They have the option to maybe not pick you up. Again, can be negotiated. You can speak with these representatives. You can let them know what you're planning on doing. And this also can be utilized as leverage. So if this direct PPO insurance company knows that, hey, I'm thinking about leaving if you don't increase my rates because I can get X, Y, and Z with a third party, that gives you that leverage again, going back to them to negotiate for more. I will say these third parties have started to become very, very popular within the last 3, 4, 5 years. All righty, getting towards the end here. So you might be asking, where do we start, right? So create a roadmap to your success, right? So start with those UCR rates. Make sure you're in line with where you need to be. Know who you're in network and know your point of contact for each insurance company. So a lot of providers that come to us, they're like, we have no idea who we were even supposed to be reaching out to get this information. I would say every insurance company at this point typically has a state representative or a regional representative for your area, your state, your region, your zip code. You typically can get that from just calling like the provider relations line, and they can direct you to who you need to be in contact with. And that's who you're normally going to be reviewing your contracts with. So review all your contracts, make sure you know what you're getting into when you're going to these insurance companies, and then start negotiating the contracts. Whether that be remapping how you're contracted, maybe you want to stay the way that you're contracted and just renegotiate what you have, and then of course reap those benefits. So I know this is a lot, and so I like to always show this slide. I know Harold and Gavi like to use this slide as well. You might be asking, is it worth it? It's a ton, right? These insurance contracts are there's insurance contracts that are like 40 pages, right? So it's a lot going through every single one of these. And if you don't outsource something like this, whether it be Apex or any other company that does it, it's a lot to take on for a provider. I don't think that this is something that they cover in dental school, right? So it's a lot to take on if you're not doing it every single day. So we took this from just a solo single provider practice, $1 million practice, 70% insurance, 30% cash. What we have here is that out of that 700, they had estimated 400,000 being able to be negotiated. If they got that averaged out to be 7% increased along all aspects, would be about 28% upside. And with their cash, it was about a 30,000. So overall, by doing that UCR analysis, negotiating your rates, which again, if you're doing it yourself, probably doesn't have a ton of overhead, $58,000 potential improvement. And if we have a lot of providers on here that maybe you have 3 and 4 and 5 different offices, we might look at this and say, oh, $58,000, maybe that's not a ton. But if you're looking at it and you maybe have 10 practices, then we're looking at hundreds and thousands of dollars, where if you're doing this with every single location, having multiple locations it really even helps bring more leverage to the table when you're going to these insurance companies. At the end of the day, these insurance companies need you to take their patients, right? If you're not going to take their patients, and there's maybe not another doctor in the 10, 15, 20-mile radius, they're going to kind of be hurting, right? So you guys really have the leverage when you're talking to these insurance companies. And I think that actually wraps it up. I'm happy to take any Q&As. I appreciate your guys' times. I hope that we covered a lot in a short amount of time.
That's great. Great, Beth. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Thank you.
Couple of other follow-ups that came through the chat, and I think you covered it a little bit, but what do you do when it's, again, you're in between patients, you're on your lunch, you're trying to deal with this, you get the runaround, you can't opt out, you're still getting the prepaid credit cards, etc. Just pay me. Give me the
Yeah.
ACH type thing. What can you advise Dr. M on how to handle that when it's the proverbial hamster wheel? I'm getting the runaround. No one's actually helping me out.
Yeah, sure. So I would definitely figure out with whatever insurance company that is, that you're working with, who your direct point of contact is. So again, a lot of these insurance companies, they have a specific state representative, and that's who you're really going to want to contact. So figuring out who that is, and a lot of the times the portal, if you have a login online portal, I would start there, see if it's in there, and changing a lot of the nowadays, a lot of the EFT changing is on the portal itself, or signing up for EFTs is on your online portal. So whether it be like the Delta Dental Toolkit or Cigna's portal, a lot of it's on the portal nowadays.
And then there is a section, again, if you'd like more information from Apex, there's a little poll I picked up, 4 and 5. We're happy to pull up some of those key demographic reports, rent rate analysis for your individual group. And if you'd like some more information from Apex, number 5, and we'll certainly get back and get you some great information. To summarize some key themes, ironically, maybe not so ironically, considering we had it planned, but it's such a similar strategy that these are long, complicated agreements that are written solely to the benefit of the landlord and the insurance company. But don't underestimate how valuable you are to them. You might think, well, I'm just a small cog in a wheel. What can I do? Right? What can I do to help improve my current situation? And don't underestimate that the landlord, the insurance company needs you, right? And you as the collective you more than you think. Especially that individual landlord in a strip mall or otherwise. If you're one of 5 spaces and 2 are vacant, and that mom and pop landlord is floating that mortgage, which is coming up for renewal at a higher rate, you are incredibly important. And for you to pick up and leave would absolutely be devastating. So, no different. When looking at dealing with some of these, you might feel David versus Goliath, but with the right advice and guidance can be key. So definitely, Dr. M, hopefully you clicked yes for number 5 and can connect with Beth and
Yeah,
Gabby
I'd be
and
happy to. So like I said, we work in all the states at this point, so I'm sure we have somebody somewhere to put them in the right direction.
yeah, and that's the key point is if you've got someone that's already worked with that provider, has a relationship, has already done 3 or 4 negotiations,
Oh yeah.
right? They know Beth. Beth knows them. It's a process. Here's what we're doing. And, there's a win-win. And even better, Beth has the other 3 or 4 examples they've done with that provider recently. So it's that much easier to say, look, you just did it, right? Here's what
Right.
we've just done. And here's what we want to accomplish this time now for Dr. M.
Yeah, and I think that that's a yeah, I see he wrote back.
Yeah.
You are welcome. I think that's a good key point too when it comes to the point of contacts. If the negotiation side is something that you want to try to tackle yourself, is really creating that leverage and that relationship even with those point of contacts within the insurance company, and getting to know who that is. I mean, here in Ohio, I've worked with the same representatives for 10, 12 years, and it does help in the long run. It really does.
Yeah. People are people after it all,
Yes.
regardless of being insurance companies.
Right.
Awesome. Really appreciate it. Fantastic, Beth. Great job. Any additional questions? We'll give it another 10 seconds. And yeah, truly appreciate it, guys. Look, you're not alone in all of this. This is the same type of challenges. Yes, on average, rising overhead expenses. Most doctors are working the same, if not harder, and taking home the same, if not less. These are trends. It is not just you. So it just becomes very important to look differently at it. No longer say, oh, well, I guess I've had a good year and I guess I'll pay my landlord more and I guess they deserve it. No,
Mhm.
right? Oh, well, the insurance, it's, a double-edged sword. What am I going to do without them? I don't want to completely cut them off. I guess I'll just, I'll just take less or otherwise. These are the type of things that hopefully tonight, from a sense of empowerment, you have a huge opportunity to do better, earn more, keep more, put yourself first. And there's some fantastic organizations out there that'll do a ton of work for you at no fee or cost, just to give you a more clear picture as to where exactly that savings and help can come from. So appreciate everyone's time. Appreciate everyone's couple extra minutes here, and give us about 10 days to process the CE credits. And certainly we'll be in touch very soon with each and every one of you. I'm looking forward to working with you soon. Thank you, Beth. Looking forward to
Thank
seeing you.
you. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Everybody have a great night.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Have a great night.